Welcome to Ecologic for the month of April. Beautiful time of the year, weather nice and cool, sun shining. Festival International coming up upon us, starting Thursday through Sunday. A real big, fun event for Lafayette. Looks like the weather's going to be good the whole time. Um, Very fortunate to have with us Jody Mesh, who wears a bunch of hats, but I guess his principal job is a commercial crawfisherman in the Chaffelay Basin. He's chairman of the Louisiana Crawfish Producers Association. He's mayor pro tem of Henderson, and a guy is very active in public issues and in the rights to navigate on the waters of Louisiana and the country. So, Jody, great to have you here. You have been involved in this issue going back to a little history. I guess 25 years ago, it must have been the middle 90s, there was a big attempt to kick the crawfishermen out of the basin.
Right, and back then I was the vice president of the LCPA West now, and now I've moved up to president. They have elected me president, but Mike Bienvenu back in those days was president, and he had contacted you, and Mike jokes about it. You know, we kind of had our backs against the wall. You know, our rights to use the waters and fish, the areas that we always historically fish, was being threatened, and everybody told him to contact you, Mr. Harrell, and he said, man, he said like I was in a dream. He said, Mr. Harrell shows up at my house in the middle of the night with a bunch of maps under his arm, and he said, Mike, it's all a bunch of bull. He said, you got to have a right to use those waters, and we've been in the fight ever since for about 25 years now, so we appreciate you. And
years of litigation. I mean, this crawfish group just finalized a case that I guess went for 13 years.
Yeah, it stayed in court for 13 years.
It involved permits to dredge canals, location canals, pipelines, and you name it. And
Right.
The fact that the engineering firms and the contractors wrote up beautiful permits. They read real good, but the guy on the dredge didn't have a copy. So they pretty much did what they pleased, and they blocked off waterways, and major waterways were blocked off. The swamps were closed off,
Right.
caused fill-in sediment, caused these dead zones all over the place.
They cut a lot of corners, leaving behind these what we call spoil banks, but we know them as dams. You know, they dam off the flow of water, and they block our navigation. You know, you can't navigate through a hill of dirt, which is crisscrossing the area that you fish. You know, and the Chaffelay Basin is a maze of water bottoms and bays and lakes, and these pipeline companies crisscross the Chaffelay Basin with these pipelines, and it's fine if they wouldn't have left such a mess behind. You know, I'm not opposed to oil and gas.
They even, doing damage even before pipelines. The old logging canals were not real good.
Right.
I mean, the original oil field canals had this idea they had to make a box cut, and they had to put a levee on each side. You know, you think maybe if you put the dirt on one side for 100 yards and put all the dirt on the other side for 100 yards, you wouldn't make a dam across the whole system.
Right. And the permits, all of the permits that the Corps of Engineers are supposed to enforce, they're the regulatory agency, were clear that they weren't supposed to block navigation, and they wasn't supposed to dam off the flow of the water. And the majority of these right-of-ways out there are out of compliance, and I think that was proven in our case, We, at first it was all about restoration. We wanted to achieve some restoration, and we met with colonels, we met with governors, we met with legislators, we met with state and federal agencies, and to the point that where finally we met with lawyers, with Mr. Joseph Joy and associates, and your son, Gordon, and they were kind enough to help us with the issue, and it turned out to be, less of a restoration thing and more of a damage thing, because the state was the only one who could potentially force restoration, and at the time, Governor Mike Foster had the state on board our suit, but that was very short-lived. And Mr. Harrell, I guess just a few weeks, and then they backed
went
off.
crying to him that if the state would require them to fix it, the sky would fall and the world would end, which
Right.
was all a lot of baloney. The fix wasn't as expensive as someone would make it out to be.
There's enough mitigation. They have to put enough mitigation, establish enough mitigation banks out there in other areas of the state or in other areas of even the country to do these types of jobs. And that's one of our issues that we have with this new pipeline coming across. We sued the Corps based upon their lack of regulation and lack of enforcement. And we want to see to it that the mitigation is done right here in the basin where the damage is done, and hopefully we can maybe achieve that through
And you
through
see
this
the
process.
legal problem with that, mitigation has to take farmland and restore it back to swampland.
Yeah.
And so you can't go to the swamp and say, well, we're gonna improve water quality in the swamp. That doesn't fit their definition of mitigation, which is taking farmland and making it back
Right.
into swampland.
And all of those issues are all connected to the issue that we're talking about tonight, and it's maritime navigation. All of these processes that have happened have altered and changed the waterways out there, and it's to the point of they're being claimed as private property because mounds of dirt have been piled up in areas that have always been navigable waters. And these private property claimants are saying it's private property, and they're preventing the public from using what the public has every right to use. So that's
Yeah,
kind of what
water-
we're talking about tonight.
Waters used in commerce are owned by the state. And not only it's not that they are used, it's just that if they could be used.
Right.
If they're
Susceptible.
susceptible to use, if they could be used in commerce. And you think about, wow, this is federal law. And these issues come up in federal court. And when there's a conflict between federal and state law, according to a U.S. Supreme Court decision of 1824, and it was a maritime case in New York, there was a conflict between the state of New York issuing a permit for a steam passenger vessel to negotiate around Oregon. That's probably a passenger vessel.
Right.
And there was a federal permit for the same activity, and a federal permit prevailed.
There are
So
laws dating back all the way into English times which
well,
support our
yeah.
rights to use the waters to sustain ourselves, to provide an income for our families, and to provide food for your family to eat. You know what I mean? It's as basic of a right as there is, and it's being trampled on here in this state.
Yeah.
And some of our legislators are accessories to the crime because it's a crime. It's a violation of our public trust doctrine, our right of use of those areas. And just recently in this House Bill 391 ruling, Mr. Harold, the legislature is kind of accessory.
391, it kind of recognized the rights of people who use tidal waters and moving waters, which they already have. But a lot of people came unglued about this, including the whole Lafayette delegation voted against this Bill of Rights for people in boats. And the appalling thing is there's no awareness this is not just the right to go fishing on a bay. With this right is the ownership of the minerals, the oil and the gas, and the soil underneath, and
Exactly.
timber and everything else.
Right.
You can't, it's comes back to a fundamental thing which is well established in the cases that y'all have been involved in.
And that's
the right to fish up to the ordinary high water mark.
And that is the main reason why commercial fishermen, such as myself and members of our organization, are targeted. Because it is our commerce taking place on these waters that establishes these areas as belonging to the public. And it's not private property. And all of those resources, because of the commerce taking place, belongs to the state and belongs to everyone. And it should be, to where we can fix our roads and our schools.
Y'all are raw fishermen. Look at the alligator hunter. Go look at this program that you see, on History Channel with Troy Landry and,
Right.
that gang. And they're in big old boats, 80, 100, 200 horsepower motors. They're in big old airboats with 300 horsepower motor. Big old boats. They're not on land anywhere.
But
I didn't see them shoot one alligator on the land. They're always in the water.
But you're confused, Mr. Harold. There's some way along the line, people have been brainwashed to believe that what these people are navigating those boats on is private property.
Private property. What kind of nonsense is
I
that?
mean, I'm not a tremendously educated person, but it's common sense to me that when I put my boat in the water, I'm not on anybody's land, I'm on the water. And it has to be that way for me to be able to go and make a living and catch
So
the amount of
it's
crawfish.
established in state and federal law that you have a right to do anything lawful up to the ordinary high water mark of a bayou or lake. Now, on a lake, the high water mark is the ownership boundary between private and public land.
Exactly.
And That's almost totally unknown in Louisiana. We have no idea where that is.
Something
You
so
gotta-
critical.
So critical. It's not just your fishing rights, but that high water mark, which is defined as, and that was in one of the cases you were involved in by federal law and
Ricade,
state
Lake.
law, Lake Ricade case, that the high water mark is defined as the level of where the water goes the highest each year, highest water of the year, average 18 and a half years. That establishes ordinary high water. And it's not a very moving target. It's pretty well stationary.
It's pretty consistent.
It's well known. If you go to Texas or Mississippi, Arkansas, they know what a high water mark is along rivers and you name it. It is required in core permits. New Orleans district is the only district in the country where you're not required to put the high water mark because nobody knows where it is. It's never been surveyed. And in that unknown is not only your rights to fish and hunt, but your mineral rights.
Exactly.
And we got a state land office. It's got 11 people in it. And they're supposed to be running this state land office for 64 parishes. Texas has 225 counties. They have 870 people. They're in a 12-story building. Our land office is in the cellar of some of the state buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually in the cellar in 2 or 3 rooms, and there is, so we have a state land office has no idea what we own because it's never been surveyed. Now, in this, somebody's gonna say, you trespassing on my land? Now, I don't know where my boundaries are. So can a district attorney take a case like that with any seriousness? Yeah, he's on my land. Where is your land? Oh, let's see. When was it surveyed last? 1817? Oh, and when it was surveyed, did they include the high water mark? No. So where is you can arrest for somebody for being in a boat, and unless there's some big super flood, you can't take a boat past the high water mark and trespass on somebody's property.
Right.
It doesn't go. The only way you
Impossible.
could is if you had some big super flood like we had in August of 16.
I said that recently in a committee meeting addressing the pipeline issues you participated in, and I addressed it toward the Louisiana Landowners Association interest who was there, talking about private property, and I said, let me address the committee. I said, I've been participating in crawfishing for almost 30 years now, and I said I fished with my dad and my uncles and my brother from the time when I was a young boy. So for over 40 years now, I've been in the Atchafalaya Basin participating in crawfishing, and I learned where to fish by doing that process with my dad and my brother and everything, and on my own, going out there. And I said I'll always fish the same areas over the past 25 to 30 years. So that's impossible that I was on anybody's property during any of that period of time.
Well,
Mr.
let's describe
Harold?
your boat. Your boat is 18-foot boat?
Right, up to 22. I have several ones. I have one about 16 feet long, two about right at 19 feet long, and one 22 feet long with about a 4-foot bottom. One with a 60 horsepower Mercury, one with a 90 horsepower Mercury, one with two of them with 35 horse or 37 horse gator tail outboards. So I use the different boats at different times of the year because it's accommodating better at different times of the year.
So in terms of federal navigation law, and this based on an Alaska case in the 90s, has established navigable waters as waters that could be traversed by a canoe, a kayak, or rubber raft.
Yeah, I think I fit the bill.
And so a motorized vessel, anywhere you could run your boat, you could cut that in half and still run a canoe, a kayak, and a rubber
To the
raft.
potential of hauling 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of catch in those boats. Mr. Howard, you don't do that every day on a daily basis out there. But our best times, during our best part of the season, I can potentially put as much as 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of catch in my boat and transport it across the water out to the boat ramp and then to the place where I sell my catch.
And some people have said, well, y'all's trespassing because you're dragging your boat over the levees.
Impossibility.
That's right.
I'm a pretty strong boy, but
You're not going to drag a Suburban without wheels on it across a levee, and that's what you'd have to do to drag your boat across
yeah,
it.
I'm not as good as I once was, and I don't think I was ever able to drag any of those boats with a load of crawfish or
No
fish.
way.
But anyway, it's ridiculous, you know, and what a tragic situation and terrible situation for our sportsman's paradise. You know what I mean? For a place that's supposed to be known so well for its fishery, and you know we're so inviting to people to come out to Louisiana and enjoy our sportsman's paradise. I mean, you just as soon put a posted sign or a keep out sign at all of these boat landings that our tax dollars has paid to put in place so that people could go out and use these areas, you know. And that's pretty much what's happening, and it's sad, you know. And I mean, the legislators who vote for this type of legislation, they're accessories to the crime, you know, Mr. Harrell, to the point of the state losing all of its revenues on all the resources, the oil and gas and everything that, I mean, the alligators, the amount of money on alligators.
Look at alligator eggs. They pay $20 an egg, and the wildlife fishers harvest them off of private land and pay the landowners most of that money.
That's an aquatic
And
creature too,
is
Mr.
that a commercial activity?
Yeah.
They are selling the eggs.
That alligator, if you put that son of a gun on anybody's land and you don't feed him, and you keep him to where he can't get in some water to where he can ambush him some sort of a prey, a snake or a nutria rat or whatever, they eat anything. That sucker's gonna die, partner. He needs to be in the
He's gonna
water.
live on land.
Yeah, he gotta be in the water.
Oh yeah, he's got to be in the water.
But if you let yourself be brainwashed by all of these television programs and these state agencies and all of these claimants, that's all private property, man, and you don't have the right to go there. That's all private property.
And look at the alligator tags and eggs. They're all administered by wildlife fishers, all to private landowners.
Yep.
Does the state issue, do they have bids on tags anymore?
Very.
They do, but-
It's political.
Yeah.
You know, I got a buddy of mine. You know, he used to get a few tags. He would bid on them with the state. But since this new Swamp People program,
They buy 'em all.
right, they outbid you to where you can't compete. And the amount per foot per gator that they pay to the trapper or the fisherman, it's not worth it. You can't make enough money on harvesting an alligator anymore. So, you know, if you're not in these shows, these reality shows or whatever you want to call them, you can't afford those tags. You know, so it's all political on who gets the tags.
So there's not many people actually.
A lot of the traditional users of those tags, they don't get them anymore.
You have to get them through private land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know Jody Mesh can't get them. I can promise you that. My brother got tagged at one time, but he
And
can't get them.
virtually all these alligators on public waters.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the commerce taking place in those boats on the water proved that it is. You could use the whole Swamp People show and prove your case of that it's commerce and it's susceptible to
Susceptible to commerce.
to commerce and it's the public's domain. It belongs to the public.
Right,
You know.
yeah.
But I
So
don't know.
look at some of the laws that we're dealing with here. The right to navigate is based on several very important things. One is what they call the public trust doctrine, which mandates that the navigable and tidal waters are the obligation of the state to maintain the rights of the public to use those waters without the interference of private parties.
Right.
That is the public trust doctrine, and it was reinforced by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Loyola University of Illinois case on Lake Michigan, where Loyola was trying to buy 54 acres of the lake along the edge of the university property, fill it, and make it into a park, which the public would have a right of use, but that changed the nature of it totally. The right of use is waters. It's a maritime use.
Exactly.
And it's the duty of the state and the country and the counties and parishes to protect your right to use those waters. That's the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
And then they have what they call the equal footing doctrine, which deals with the sovereignty of lands. And what it says is the original 13 colonies enjoyed certain rights and privileges. Amongst those, the rights of ownership of tidal and navigable waters. They call sovereignty lands. Now, when Louisiana went through the Civil War, time afterwards during Reconstruction, the first thing was grabbed was all the farmland and everything else. So it was a feeding frenzy of people came down and kicking people off their farms and taking their lands. And then the next, they went after woodlands, and the state really wasn't in a position to sell them. So in 1880, they set up Act 75, which set up the state land office to sell amongst the woodlands and the prairie lands. Those were sold for 25 cents an acre. But the marshlands, the lands, that's paragraph 11 of that law, set up the sale of the sea marsh, defined as lands subject to tidal overflow, not suitable for human habitation or cultivation. And that was 12.5 cents an acre. So a section was $80, and a township was $2,800. And people came and bought this stuff like crazy. It was in the 1880s, the value that was there was fur. Louisiana, even then, was the top fur producer in the nation. So fur was kind of king. We didn't have all the synthetics, and so fur was very important. But anyway, and some of them bought it just for duck hunting. I mean, people, we had great duck hunting down in this marsh. And then that didn't distinguish between lakes and bays and bayous. And so you got a place like White Lake, it's privately owned, they sold it. White Lake has had 1,200 oil wells in it, has over 300 producing wells in it now. It all goes in private pockets. And you look at a place like Wax Lake, Big Long Lake off of Atchafalaya Bay on the north shore of Africa, an arm of the sea. 2/3 of it is privately owned, 1/3 belongs to the state. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Of course, mostly
Bastion Bay.
Bastion Bay is another, the biggest gas field in Louisiana. You can't even see land, it's all on private land. You go to it in a 60-foot crew boat, and so this is appalling, that not only is it your right to fish these waters and to hunt on those waters, but it's your minerals.
Everyone should call their legislators and tell them, say, look, we need to get our state out of the financial deficit that it's in, and we need you all to push the governor and push the rest of the legislature to claim our lakes and our bays and our water bottoms and the resources thereupon. Let's get our state out of the financial crisis that it's in. Call your legislators up and tell them.
I go to a coastal restoration meeting in Morgan City a couple of weeks ago, and they show a plan that's taken 7 million cubic yards out of the Atchafalaya Bay Wildlife Management Area. I asked, do they have permission to do that? No. Did they buy this from the state? No. You just go take it?
What type of an environmental impact is it going to have on that area?
Dredge 7 million cubic yards of dirt. It's going to have holes 30 feet deep. That's an environmental disaster. That you have these dead zones, 200 or 300 acres. That's 25, 30 feet deep, where the water normally.
I'm sure
is 4
they did
feet
an
deep.
extensive EIS too,
No,
Mr.
of course
Aaron.
not. None of that. And they're going to take this public dirt and put it on private land, and there'll be posted signs there at a cost of $80,000 an acre, and sometimes more. We're making land, which the marsh is marshing away for a lot of reasons, and it's going to be worse because you dredge up the bay around it.
And we can't go there. We won't be. We're the one paying the bill, but we're going to be prosecuted for trespassing if we try to go there.
You're taking public tax dollars and making private land. This is unbelievable. That this is, I guess coastal restoration is an important thing, but how we restore the coast is very important. And you're going to take my tax dollars, spend $40 million, $50 million, making 200 acres of land that I can't set foot on. That got posted. If you do succeed, And nobody's dealing with what impact this has on fisheries. Nobody, no way to measure success. Nobody's going to say, well, are there shrimp there now? Are there good plants there now? Is the water quality good there now? There's no baseline. So they'll go spend $50 million making 200 acres of land, and then, you know, what do you have when you're through? There's no way to measure the success other than a lot of tax dollars thrown away. They're ruining the bay, and they're taking an area that I can fish. They're ruining it for fishing by making these super holes.
Yeah.
These are ecological dead zones when you dredge these holes in the bottom of the bay. And they say, well, it'll recover in 10 to 15 years. Well, it may fill, but will the marine benthos community, those critters that live in the first 5 or 6 inches of topsoil, will they recover?
Right. And if you don't know where you were before you started the project, how are you going to know what you did to it? You know,
That's right.
which is so
No idea.
convenient, you know. So, well, we didn't know what it was before, so we have no way of saying that we made it worse, or we worsened the area. You know.
A lot of public attention was paid to this House Bill 391, where Representative Pearson from Slidell realized that he was notified that big bass tournaments in Louisiana are canceled.
Yeah, the Bass
The
Association.
Redfish Association is canceling their tournaments because of this abuse that fishermen are faced in dealing with fishing on public waters. They're threatened with arrest. They often met with people with arms. You know, this is unbelievable that public waters are being privatized unlawfully, and the state legislature has an opportunity to deal with it, and they just flat kick it out. And every one of our Lafayette area representatives voted against this Bill of Rights for fishermen.
Right.
And with the Bill of Rights for fishermen is all the minerals and everything else that goes with it. We should be demanding that the state survey the high water mark on all those bays and all those lakes all over. The only places that has been done, there's a place in the basin of 6 Mile Lake, the Placid case, where Texaco and Gulf were fighting over whether private landowners or the state could lease the land. The state ultimately won. And that's about the only spot in Louisiana where the high water mark was surveyed, because 2 big oil giants were fighting over the issue. It wasn't crawfishermen fighting over it.
Right.
So, you know, you can easily see why the state's broke. You know, if we can't tell you within 1 million acres what we own, think about all the oil and 1 million acres bound to have oil and gas on it and a history of it. And if the state establishes ownership, they could go back and reclaim all those lost revenues. We've had cases involving the fishermen where whole oil fields, the Bayou Laurent oil field, involved crawfishermen being kicked out of this area. It landed in federal and state court. Both courts ruled in favor of these waters being public. And you got a big oil field on it. Notify the state land office. State land officers were in some of these proceedings. Now the oil field's yours. Oh, we don't want to interrupt the relationship we have with the landowners in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
What kind of nonsense? We owe our children a good education. We owe our citizens good roads and good bridges.
Yeah.
And you know, all the things that public money brings. You know, so we have a state that's asleep on the switch, and it doesn't make any difference who's governor, who's in office. You know, these folks bend to the demands of these big property owners, these claimants who are claiming something that's not theirs, often stealing from the public trust, and that's being supported by our politicians.
Yeah. And I don't know about everybody who's within the sound of our voice, but I'm going to continue to fight for what I enjoy and love to do and what I was born to do. You know, whenever somebody's going to come out and try to threaten me and tell me that I'm trespassing in an area which I'm in my boat and I'm participating in commerce, or I know it's susceptible to commerce, I'm not going anywhere. They're going to just have to, you know, the burden of proof may be on me that I'm trespassing, but I'm going to turn it around and they're going to have to prove that they own it, you know. And that's a difficult thing to do when you don't have a clearly surveyed boundary, when someone is in a boat participating in commerce, that's a tough thing to do. So I'm going to continue my fight, and hopefully maybe my kids won't have as much of a problem with it as I've had and our past generations have had with it. But we need to all stand up for what belongs to us. We don't owe those people anything. What do they do for the state? What do they put back into the state? They've been stealing from the state for hundreds of years, over 100 years. I don't see where they're putting back into the state. They're just stealing and robbing the state.
Of course, and it's when you talk about school board lands, Section 16 lands, and the Crawfish Group in Catahoula raised this issue with the St. Martin Parish School Board, and it's appalling. St. Martin Parish received over 25,000 acres of school lands, Section 16 lands. They have 8,000 acres left. Over 17,000 acres have been taken from the school children. They had recently, 5 or 6 years ago, a well producing 600-700 barrels a day in Henderson. And it's a oil unit, so it's only 40-50 acres in a 640-acre school land site,
Right.
north of I-10. They figured a way to steal it all from those kids. The mineral board ruled that all that oil was in a 5-mile long triangle. The school board ended up with 3% of that oil. It should have been all of their oil. This is recent.
But
5 or
before
6
that,
years
they
ago.
were getting nothing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's appalling that.
And that's an issue that we
and
raised
look at where our
because of our
education
fight.
is.
Mr. Harold, that's an issue that we raised because of our fight.
Absolutely, yeah. As one of the crawfish, I'm tired of selling donuts so my kids can go to
Right,
school.
and you know, it's sad that this burden has to be dumped on the shoulders of a commercial fisherman or group of commercial fishermen who are within our organization. That we have to do the jobs of these agencies, these agency heads and these people employed by these agencies. Some of them make 6-figure incomes. You know what I mean? I struggle to make a living and support my family by fishing and making the poor man's living that I make. It's sad that the burden falls upon me and those like me to prove this for the state and fight this for the state when all these people are in office or in position that they're supposed to be doing the job to represent the people and they don't do it. It's all a part of government being detrimental to our rights and our freedoms, our basic freedoms, which the Constitution is clear. When government threatens your rights, you overthrow it. Those people in place that are not working in the best interest of us, the people, you got to vote them out of there, man. You put somebody in place who has a backbone and who has morals and who wants to do what is right for everybody and not for the wealthy interests of the world. And anyway.
One of the cases that really turned this issue around was the Larry Daigle case, where private landowners in the basin in St. Martin Parish claimed that Mr. Daigle, who was a very hard-working fisherman from Morgan City, was violating their property rights, that he was trespassing on their land, crawfishing on their land. He had 7 criminal trespass charges against him. The first count is 6 months in jail and $500 fine. So what do you do with 7 of them? And that was tried in St. Martinville under Judge John Connery over a 5-day period. And there was a 6th day where the judge spent the day in the swamp in the woods with the district attorney's representative, the landowner's representative, myself.
In a boat, not in a vehicle.
In a boat.
Yeah.
A boat, in the swamp, exactly where he was fishing. And, the judge said he got to the site, and by Mystic Crew, he noticed that there were posted signs all over the place, and he asked the landowners, is this bayou public? Oh no, the bayou is private. I said, well, I noticed that this bayou hasn't been dredged. How deep is it? Oh, it's 25, 30 feet deep. So he said that drilling location across from us, I see they built a slip there. I can see the spoil banks there. But that came up here without having to dredge anywhere? Oh yeah, I said, yeah. So tugs and barges, so says, that's a commercial activity. Well, yes, sure. So anyway, the judge said, can we go into the woods? And we went into the woods, and yes, the landowner's rep said, how deep is the water? He said, oh, it's only about a foot. Well, the judge said, pull up to that willow branch over there. He cut it and he stuck it in. The judge is about 6'3", so he stuck it all the way down. The pole was about 7 feet deep, and he pulled it up, and his hand was over his head. Hey, this water's 7 feet deep. Oh, you must have put it in a hole, you know. Oh no, they went. So, and he said, well, I see there's a lot of crawfish traps here. Why aren't you arresting those guys? Oh, Judge, that's last year's trap. Let me pull one up. So he pulled, there was three or four different flag colors. He pulled up each color. Each of them had big crawfish and fresh bait in it. And you could hear the crawfish running. They were running all around as the boats were running. So I said, oh, not only are these crawfish, these are large crawfish. Aren't y'all selling those large crawfish to France and Belgium? So they're not only in commerce, they're in international commerce.
Yeah.
You know? So that's how we ended up with a ruling of not guilty, because he was fishing in the waters of the nation. So that even impacted the potential sale of that property. The Corps was looking at buying it. When they found out about the ruling, it really challenged the ownership and put a cloud over the Corps actually buying that 30,000 acres, which meant that the Larry Daigle case saved the 30,000 acres was being potentially bought for $1,500 an acre, and that didn't happen. So that was the $45 million that the federal government didn't use to buy the land where Larry Daigle was fishing.
Well, and look, I'm thankful for Mr. Larry Daigle that you know, he had the tenacity and you know, the desire to stand up for himself and not just fold over. And you know, and
he'd still be in jail.
Exactly. he fought for his rights, and I mean, we have a good ruling, you know, a good precedent case.
And to Judge Conrad's credit, he knew that this is not just one guy crawfishing. This was, you know, thousands of fishermen fishing it throughout Louisiana, not only in the basin, but in similar situations.
In some of our best years, we've had as many as 2,000 licensed commercial crawfishermen fishing the Atchafalaya Basin, you know, so.
To the credit of the court, they knew the gravity of it, and normally a trespass case is 5 minutes in the court. This was 5 days, and another whole day where the judge says, I can't make a decision unless I actually go visit the spot,
right,
and see what we're dealing with.
Thank God we had a good judge who was unbiased
really
and
judge,
wanted to,
yes.
you know, get the facts, you know, and he went out there and he did all of that. Because if he would have listened to the side of the land claimants, that was all high ground that you could build skyscrapers
See,
on.
and that
out
was
there.
a district attorney, you know, and once that decision made, the district attorney couldn't appeal it.
Right.
So it was a decision as final as a Supreme Court decision. Very important decision. And there's been other cases. The Bijou Surette case involved the Indian bayou hunting area in St. Landry Parish, where they had a timbering operation there in that swamp, and they had built some logging roads and closed the bayou.
And it was prior to the exchange over to the Indian
right.
Bayou.
It was
the
still
Corps.
private
It
land.
was privately claimed at that time.
And Bijou and Surette could go, when the high water came in the spring, they could jump that road.
Right.
It was a dirt bridge.
Every year the water gets high enough to
So,
traverse over that area.
and the fact that you put a barrier on a navigable waterway doesn't change the navigability status.
Right.
And that went to court in Opelousas, and that judge convicted both those guys of criminal trespass. And they had a 6 months to serve. And the $500 fine, and that was appealed to the Third Circuit, and the Third Circuit didn't even hear it. They just threw it out, you know. So that was a real victory too,
Right.
because, and Judge Doherty in federal court reaffirmed that legal posture that the Third Circuit took, that a man-made barrier on a navigable water doesn't change the navigability status.
Right. She argued, she made the argument that even the Great Lakes at times become non-navigable because they freeze over. but it doesn't make them non-navigable just for that season of time that they freeze over and you can't navigate across. So she said an area that is blocked off by man's means doesn't change the navigability of an area. It still
Yeah,
remains
she
navigable.
made the point, if you took a big ship and sunk it in Mississippi and blocked it, doesn't mean it was no longer navigable.
Right.
And she cited the fact that the river freezes over. The fact that it's frozen over, you can drive a truck on it, doesn't mean it's not navigable.
Right.
So, very important legal point. So you apply those issues to this coastal marsh issue. You know, it just really doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make sense to me why a private property owner would be trying to block people from navigating in open waters of the bays.
Right.
A lot of what we're talking about is, you know, the fact that this was land 100 years ago, and it's washing away like the Dickens. And the problem is that the land is not washing away in the courthouse. All the property records show all the land is there. So that guy claimed, well, you know, my great grandfather through, you know, eons ago in the 19th century bought this land for 12 cents an acre, and so I still own it. Now, that claim is pretty good because they're getting the minerals on it.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting the oil and gas on it, you know, so they want to just raise the dickens with, you know, fishermen who are not hurting their property in any kind of way, you know. I mean, it's not like you're going out there and cutting their trees and stealing it or anything like that.
No, just stop and think about it.
The fish and crawfish in the water is a public thing.
And
They're like the
24-foot boats, they have a baited hook on the end of a line that they're casting with a fishing pole or an artificial lure. They're not casting it on anybody's land. They're casting in the water that a fish is going to potentially bite so they can catch a fish. So
I mean, they're
it's
not
so
using dynamite to
no,
catch a fish.
it's so ridiculous, man. And our legislators, I mean, they side right along with them, you know. So it's sad.
And if you look at coastal restoration, it's so dominated by the landowners, and they're, you know, we had a project in Vermilion Parish, just south of here, and one of the coastal restoration scientists came up with a plan to fix this area around Coles Bayou, spent about $1.5 million, and just go restore the flow of the bayous. All that meant was go with a dredge, pull out the plugs, pull out the dams, and let the shrimp and the juvenile speckled trout, redfish, and the sediment, all those things come in and out. Allow for tidal exchange, which allows the grass to grow and allows the system to breathe and to grow plants. And, oh no, the landowners didn't want that. They wanted to put 11 dams at $850,000 a piece. They turned a $2 million project into a $30 million project that'll block all the sediment from coming in and out, all the shrimp, juvenile trout, you know, crabs, all the decaying vegetable matter that dies off each winter that goes to feed the clams and the oysters. None of that can go in and out.
But more importantly to them, will block off any potential navigation on what they're claiming as their private property.
Well, they block the tidal exchange. You see, land subject to tidal exchange belong to the state.
Right.
And, you know, it's appalling too that along with this, you know, not knowing where the boundary is the fact that the very little taxes being paid on this. There's one property owner in Vermilion Parish, 25,000 acres. Their taxes in 2016 on that property was $2,400. Now in Vermilion Parish, 49% of property tax goes to the schools. So on 25,000 acres, you got $1,200 would go to the schools. Now, Vermilion Parish teachers haven't gotten a pay raise in 10 years. This one big property owner, 25,000 acres is big property owner, any way you want to talk, even Texas. The revenue from that property is not enough to pay a teacher 1 month. Why we have the poorest school system in the country? We've just been rated 4th and 8th graders, 8 different tests, and only one, we weren't 50. We were 49. So how does that impact our future? The lowest college graduation rate, the fullest prisons, poor education, high crime rate, and full prisons, they're all economic partners. So there's a lot more than fishing rights in these issues, a lot more than fishing rights and hunting rights on public waters. The state fails miserably to deal with the public trust doctrine. I would invite every lawyer sitting in that legislature, and 2/3 of them are lawyers, including some from our own Lafayette delegation, to go read the public trust doctrine. Read the law. What is it? What is your duty as a state official to protect the rights of people to use?
And just please do your job. You know, do your job. Represent the public the way you're supposed to, man. You know, you're supposed to represent the majority. You don't represent the minority. You know, especially in a state which is the sportsman's paradise, and we're so rich in resources. I mean, come on, man. It ought to be a shame. All of those voting for those bills which are in the public's interest, voting against them, they should be ashamed of themselves.
You can look at some of these other cases where just the violation of the public trust is just horrible. And a lot of these issues have come to court. The DeSambor case dealt with the levee board on the Mississippi River building an inside guide levee. They have the big high main levee, and if they put a small levee close to the river, then 8 out of 9 years they can plant soybeans in all that area. The landowners sued the levee board and said, you gotta pay us for taking our land and taking our dirt to make the levee. And the Louisiana Supreme Court said no, up to the high water mark, you know, any lawful activity is allowed up to the ordinary high water mark, and building levees is a lawful activity. So they were not compensated. And that's where they set the precedent of using gauges to determine high water mark. And that has come out in other court cases. But you put the high water mark around Vermilion Bay, you put the high water mark around, you know, all those bays.
Talk about solve a lot of our problems, our money woes. I mean, our access issues, our ability to fish and use the resources that belong to us, that belong to the people, that all men may freely use. Put the ordinary high water mark in on every waterway and water bottom and lake and bay in the state, and you talk about solve a lot of the problems.
And this is true across the state from top to bottom. This is true from Arkansas on down, where we don't have a clue whether we know where it should be, because we have gauges everywhere that tell us what that number is.
I know where it is, because my living depends upon me knowing where it is.
You can look at the picture of the trees there, you can see the water line on the trees.
There's a good picture of it this year, because we've been sitting at 17.5, 17.3 for over a week, almost 2 weeks now, and that's right around where the ordinary is. It's right around 18 feet. And I tell you what, wherever that mark is at that water level right now, that's all below the ordinary high water mark, and we have every right of use of all of that.
And as ordinary high water, which is the highest the water comes every average 18 years, there is the flood level. That's entirely different. And then you have, what do they call it, 20-foot level at Butte Road.
Right.
That's
flood stage. It
flood
used to be
stage.
25. The Corps lowered it from 25 to 20.
Right.
That's flood stage.
Flood stage is just a number where it goes over the ordinary bank. But the right doesn't go to flood stage. It goes to ordinary high water.
Right.
And you have drought years and you have flood years. But over 18 and a half years, and they use 18 and a half years because that is a total lunar cycle. And that is well established in federal law.
And then listen, one can argue that due to the installation of all these locks and dams all up and down the river system, we have a lot less water which comes into the Atchafalaya Basin and into our coastal region than we potentially could have, because it's locked behind hundreds of locks and dams all up and down the river system.
You can look
right now we're sitting at about a 20-foot difference from the Mississippi River side of the old river control structure to the Atchafalaya River side. So we're sitting at 17.3 today at the Butte Rose gauge, and we could potentially be at least 7 or 8 feet higher at that gauge, you know. So
And you make an important point. They think because they put the levees in that raise the water levels. Absolutely not. If you look at 1900 to 1935, and this is computations by a hydrologist from LSU, Dr. Paul Kemp, the ordinary high water mark for Butte LaRose and that from 1900 to 1935. 1935 is prominent, that's when the levees were finished.
Right.
That was like 23.4 feet. Then from 1935 to 1970, it
21.
dropped to around 21. And from 1970 to now, it dropped to 17 and a half.
Exactly.
Now, when you do the same dock numbers on the Mississippi, they did this at Bayou Sarah at St. Francisville. And in 100 years, the water level has changed 1/10 of a foot. See if we get a call. No, I don't know if we have a call. So this 20-foot difference between the Mississippi and the Chapelay is something very much man-made.
Bayou Sarah, go ahead, go back on your
By
point.
Sarah, they hadn't changed it, but 100th of a foot in
Yeah,
100 years.
on the Mississippi.
On the Mississippi.
But we fell off by
Yeah.
what,
We fell off
seven,
by
8 feet?
5 or 6 feet.
Please hold while I try to. Thank you for calling TV Studio Q. Please hold for the next.
So, we thought we had a call coming in, but it wasn't. So, when you go to Texas, they know where the high water mark is. In fact, when Hurricane Ike came through, people who had the Gulf washed under their camps on the west side of Galveston Island got notices from the state. Your camp is now on state water bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
Negotiate with CS to negotiate a lease. And think, wow. And Texas, all their marshlands, they don't allow the bayous to be closed. And they're all public. If your boat can float, you can fish there.
In the words of one of our senators who was the Senate chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, I won't mention his name, I probably should, but he referred to some of these fishermen who fish the coast. When they said, it's not like that in Texas, he said, well, move to Texas if you don't like the way it is in Louisiana. That's what one of our senators, the chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, told and directed a user of the waters in Louisiana and a person he's supposed to be representing. Move to Texas. If you want to go fish the areas that you can't fish in Louisiana, then move to Texas. That's sad.
That is really sad. And we think of the sportsman paradise, and people are being threatened with arrest for fishing in public water.
And Mr. Harrell, quickly, another issue that we may have to deal with as users of our marsh areas and the Chafalai Basin area that I think they're going to potentially target us is House Bill 727, which is supposed to be targeting critical infrastructure, and it's including pipelines in this deal as far as plants and utilities, stuff like that, like people potentially destroying that stuff or causing harm or human harm or whatever. But they're including pipelines to the potential that all of these pipelines, which crisscross the Chafalai Basin and crisscross our coastal region, that potentially if I'm traversing in an area of a pipeline, and these crisscross all over the areas that we fish. I mean, we see them all over Louisiana. You can't do without seeing them. They're there. And you're using them sometimes. Well, at any time, if they want to target you, that you're potentially going to harm something in that critical infrastructure, you can be cited with fines up to $1,000, $5,000, I think, of fines, 5 years imprisonment.
6 to 20 years in prison.
6 to 20 years imprisonment. And I believe that this is going to potentially be used to target us, those who are the watchdogs of the basin, members of my organization, members of the Sierra Club, all of us who are out there trying to make sure that these people stay in compliance and don't disrupt our environment any further than they already have, because the Corps is not doing the job, DEQ is not doing the job, all of these agencies who are supposed to do the job are not doing the job. So we're the ones out there that's keeping an eye and being the watchdog out there. Well, this bill by Representative Tebow, I think it is, 727. It's flying through the legislature right now. Everybody's endorsing onto it. they're supporting. And look, and I'm all in favor of stopping people from harming, critical infrastructure that can potentially cause devastation to the environment or the community. But I'm not gonna protest or go out and try to damage any of this stuff. But I will report the violators, and I will, do my best to cite those who are in violation and they're doing something that is detrimental to our environment. But because of this bill, I can potentially have to serve time over it. So we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, and there's another bill about gates on the levees. That's
Yeah, 871.
871, where all along the levee system, they're putting gates and no trespassing.
Yeah, gating up our roadways along our levee systems and putting barricades. And this bill is going to address that. It's going to make it illegal to block through traffic on any road adjacent to levees in Louisiana, which is a good bill. You have all of these boat ramps, and we need access to.
But about covering the subject, we've beat them up pretty hard. So thank you so much for sharing your insight from a commercial fisherman's perspective, and as your leadership role with the Fishermen, commercial fishermen is so important that your voice is heard about the importance of the rights that people have to navigate on the public waters of the state. Because with it also is our mineral rights and a lot of other rights. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome, Mr. Howard. We're going to keep up the fight.